FedEx is close to signing a contract extension with Gibbs Racing, and Denny Hamlin says he communicated with Chase Elliott during the week. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to the video. We got to NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We'll go ahead by starting talking about Worldwide Technology Raceway. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race or Worldwide Technology Raceway, you saw your feeds basically cut out. What ended up happening was, according to NASCAR, there was an offside fiber connectivity failure that really affected the racetrack in general. I thought this was just a Fox issue. Like I said, it just turns out there's basically an issue with Worldwide Technology Raceway. It's a shame because this track absolutely deserves a Cup Day long-term and going forward. And for this to happen is really unfortunate because this is the second time in the last year there's been power outages or internet failures, something that has just happened. It's been really bizarre. It made the race a lot more bizarre because you didn't have internet at the racetrack and affected the race overall. It's a shame what happened. You can't really control it, unfortunately, though. It's a shame what ended up happening, but it is what it is. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Spanish Grand Prix. As on Sunday morning, of course, you had the Spanish Grand Prix. And this race basically was a domination day by Max Verstappen, who basically won by like 10 or 15 seconds or almost 20 seconds and put up a dominating clinic, led every single lap of the race, and he went on to win his 40th career Formula One race. Max Verstappen is definitely the favorite to win the championship right now. I think he's likely going to end up winning the championship. Just overall, a very dominating day for Max Verstappen to pick up the victory. And massive congratulations, a well-deserved win for him, and he wins the Spanish Grand Prix. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Detroit Grand Prix. As while the NASCAR Cup Series race at Gateway was going on, you had the IndyCar race in Detroit. And we saw a pretty chaotic and pretty crazy race in Detroit. First time, of course, on the new Detroit layout. You had like 7 or 8 cautions in this race. But it came down basically to 2 drivers for the victory, that being Alex Palou and Will Power. With Alex Palou holding off a hard-charging Will Power to pick up his second victory of the 2023 IndyCar season, extends his points lead. Alex Palou looked really strong and really confident this year and has a really massive points lead currently at the moment right now, so I think he's absolutely the favorite to win the IndyCar Championship for the second year of the last 3 years. Palou obviously is likely not going to be back at Chip Ganassi. I don't know why he leaves Ganassi. You got to understand he wants to go to Aaron McLaren, maybe long-term and go to Formula One. But at the end of the day, a massive congratulations to Alex Palou getting his second victory of the season, and it's looking like he could end up winning the championship in 2023. He did a really good job and well-deserved win. Congratulations to him on getting the victory. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Coca-Cola 600 TV ratings. Now, we already talked about the main ratings that came out. But according to Adam Stern on Friday, at 3.399 million viewers, the 2023 Coca-Cola 600 was the most viewed Monday race since 2014, excluding the 2014 Daytona 500. That is absolutely really impressive, all things considered, because last year's Coca-Cola 600, I believe, had about 4 million people that tuned in the event. So for this event to have almost 3.4 million people tune in on a rain delay race that went for basically from start from like 2 o'clock Central Standard Time, almost 8 or 9 Central Standard Time, I think is extremely impressive and really great to see. So very happy to see the ratings were really good and see that it was the most viewed event in a long time. Just absolutely amazing and absolutely incredible to see that we saw really great ratings for the event. Overall, really exciting stuff, and glad to see that the ratings were the most watched since 2014. Really awesome stuff, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Chase Briscoe. Now, Chase Briscoe spoke to the media over the week, and he spoke on the massive penalty he received. Now, remember, Chase Briscoe received a 120-point driver and owner point penalty. Johnny Klosmeyer has been suspended for 6 races and also got a $250,000 fine. Now, he was very frustrated with the penalty, but he says it was a justified penalty and says he will stand by his team regardless, and just said that penalty could have been a lot worse because it's been mentioned throughout the week by Bob Pockrass and Larry McReynolds, but basically, he could have been handed, basically his playoff eligibility could have been completely removed, and he may have been sent home for this week at Gateway had it, because this is the biggest penalty we've seen probably in NASCAR history, not collectively on the fine side of things, but this was a huge penalty for Chase Briscoe, and what makes it frustrating too is how bad the season has been for Chase Briscoe this year, and how far that team was off at the Coke 600 at Charlotte. So to see that he thought it was justified, because they could have gotten a hand in worse, and it's no surprise that they're not going to appeal the penalty. Obviously, they could have waited until today to go ahead and appeal, but obviously SHR made the right call and right decision in my opinion, because what we found out, it was a counterfeit part with the NACA ducks. So Really unfortunate situation here, how big the penalty is considering how bad your SHR is at, unless you're Kevin Harvick, how frustrating it's been for this team. And Chase Briscoe just also did not have a good race at Gateway, had a frustrating race overall, and for him to just struggle this year has not been fun to see. But I agree with that. He had every right to agree with the decision, and he absolutely agreed with the decision. I respect him for not getting frustrated with the decision that NASCAR made. I know he's frustrated, but also same token, same time, I think he understands the rules and penalties. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jeske and Zane Smith. Now, if you watch a NASCAR Truck Series race on Saturday for the Xfinity Series race took place in Portland, which we'll talk about some incidents from that here in just a little bit, you saw what happened going into turn number 3. So as in one of the late race restarts, about 3 or 4 laps to go in this race, Jeske and Zane Smith were battling for the race win. And unfortunately, Jeske made a major mistake going to turn number 3, ended up wrecking himself and Zane Smith, basically handing the win to Grant Enfinger. Now, Jeske spoke to the media after the race, and he basically says it was inexcusable on his part. And then he went on social media after the race, and he actually apologized to Zane Smith and Firmware Motorsports as well, and was mad at himself for causing a wreck. Look, Jeske, I think, is an extremely talented driver, and he just made a very, very innocent mistake. Yeah, he kind of has made a couple mistakes recently, but Jeske is not historically known for making a lot of mistakes, so it was really frustrating to see him not have a good race. He was actually the fastest truck in the race. Thought he was probably going to win. He was my pick after Corey Ham sat out this past week. But it was really frustrating to see what ended up happening to Ty. And I feel bad for Ty a little bit because a lot of people are calling him out on social media. And Jeske just made a little bit of a mistake. And I also feel bad for Zane Smith too because there is a lack of respect on the track. But I think Jeske just made a little bit of a mistake. I get him being frustrated at himself, but I don't think Jeske should be too mad at himself because Jeske just made a little bit of a mistake. He had a shot at winning and cost himself a win, but he's in a really good position to points right now, so at least he could smile that he's in a really good position to points. I do appreciate how classy he was, though, to apologize to Zane Smith. It was just a little bit of a mistake, though, and it was not intentional, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Osbar. Now, Carson Osbar yesterday made his NASCAR Cup Series debut, and he was very, very impressive in his NASCAR Cup Series debut until he had the brake rotor failure. But before the brake rotor failure ended up happening for Carson Osbar, he was almost inside the top 15 in a Spire Motorsports car, and he was outrunning Corey LaJoie in this race. I think Carson Osbar has been really impressive over the last few months. So look how good he's been in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, being in the top 10 on a pretty consistent basis. In the 2 or 3 starts he's ran, I know he had issues at COTA, but that was basically in an SS Greenlight car where the car filled, where he just made a mistake. And recently he's been really good in the Truck Series as well. Even though Carson Osbar didn't get the finish he probably deserved, I think Carson Osbar could have surprisingly maybe got a top 10 or top 15, especially if this team could have played the right strategy. But he was moving up to the field and one of the few cars that really could pass in this race. It's unfortunate what happened, but even Dale Jr. was impressive. There's a lot of talk about his future past this year. Obviously, Carson Osbar could move up to the Xfinity Series full-time next year, maybe going to Junior Motorsports, considering the fact that Spire and Junior Motorsports do work together. In the Xfinity Series, Aspire uses cars from Junior Motorsports. I'd imagine that they're going to be looking at Carson maybe next year full-time in the 8 car, considering Josh Berry is expected to go to Stewart-Haas Racing next season. Carson could go to that team, but he was extremely impressive in his debut, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey LaJoie. Now, while Carson Osbar made his debut in the 7 car, you had Corey LaJoie, who was driving the number 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports, as of course Chase Elliott had been suspended this past week due to Ryber and Denny Hamlin down the straightaway at Charlotte. Well, Corey LaJoie, after the race, was really, really frustrated with his day and wished he could have done a lot better, but he thanked Hendrick Motorsports for the opportunity. Now, Corey LaJoie obviously did not have a very good day and finished 21st. And while his day was not very good and a lot of people thought he could do better, I want to give Corey LaJoie a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Could have he had a better run for sure? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But Hendrick Motorsports overall this week and outside of William Byron was off. Yes, Kyle Larson did end up finishing 4th, but let's be honest, Kyle Larson at one point was almost a lap down in this race and was 31st or 32nd at one point. The biggest reason why Kyle Larson got up there is because their team made the right adjustments to get up to the front, and also Kyle Larson's team took 2 tires. They stayed up front and contended, and they were able to stay up there because of the 2-tire strategy, because tires really did not mean a lot. And I really wish Corey's team could have done a two-tire strategy to get a little closer to the front. I don't want to see people hating on Corey LaJoie as much. I know he could have definitely done a little better for sure. But at the same token, same time, like I said, Hendrick Motorsports, they were way off this weekend. And Gateway is one of Hendrick Motorsports' worst tracks. I really hope that this doesn't hurt Corey LaJoie's confidence, because you look how good Corey LaJoie has generally been running this season. And for him to struggle a little bit, it was frustrating to see. But at the same token, same time, I'm going to give Corey a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I hope he can learn and hope he can get more opportunities going forward. I know there's been a lot of rumors about his future. I think he's going to probably likely be a Spire next year. But again, I hope that his stock doesn't go down because of this. Because again, I think he definitely would have wanted to run a little better than he ended up doing. It's frustrating for him, and I feel for Corey a little bit. So hopefully he gets more opportunities going forward with good teams. But again, I think that he didn't have as good a run as he could have. But I'm not going to put full blame on Corey LaJoie. It definitely could have been better, but I'm not putting full blame on Corey LaJoie in that situation. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Sheldon Creed and John Hunter Nemechek. Now, if you watched NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Portland, you saw some of the beef between Sheldon Creed and John Hunter Nemechek. Coming to the end of stage number 2, John Nemechek had a big run on Sheldon Creed. And instead of getting a big run, having a photo finish across the line, Sheldon Creed just got straight up dumped going into the final corner and spun into the grass in the dirt. And John Hunter, even though he dumped Sheldon Creed, looked like he was going to win the stage, he got beat in a photo finish by Cole Custer. Now, later in the race, we saw payback from Sheldon Creed, where near the end of the race, Sheldon Creed would officially get back into John Nemechek and spun him out and cost John Hunter a really strong run. Now, after the race, both Sheldon Creed and John Hunter Nemechek had a conversation, but it seemed like it was very civil. And after John Hunter feels like he did apologize, he went to actually apologize to Sheldon Creed, and both of them gave a pump up, basically a fist pump and all that kind of stuff, and there was no fight after race between both of them, and they feel like they're even after what happened. In my honest opinion, John Hunter has shown at times he can be a little bit of a dirty race car driver. But I think John Hunter did handle the situation very well. He wasn't mad at Sheldon after. He felt like he was fair and square situation. And I feel like Sheldon Creed finally showed that he's not going to take anymore. I feel like Sheldon Creed has been shown a lot of disrespect in the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series at times as well. Because Sheldon Creed had one of the best cars in this race. There's no doubt at that point that John Hunter did have a better car than Sheldon Creed. But he could have been a little bit more patient and lost the race because of that stupidity that he put on the racetrack. But I will give John Hunter the benefit of the doubt. He did show a little bit of respect after, and I do have to give him props for not getting frustrated with him after the race. I know they had the discussion, but it didn't seem like they were too mad and too frustrated with each other after the race. So it's good to see. It looks like both drivers are even after that. I'm glad to see there's no more issues between the drivers. Hoping they can move on and go forward and focus on their races going into the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeb Burton versus Chandler Smith. Now, after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, there was a fight that broke out between Jeb Burton and Chandler Smith. Jeb Burton and Chandler Smith were having a really bad conversation. We were having a conversation, and we saw Jeb Burton basically start throwing fists, and multiple crew members were trying to hold Jeb Burton back. What's very interesting, a few years ago, Jeb Burton was driving for that same organization. Now, why was Jeb Burton really upset with Chandler Smith? Well, if you watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw that Jeb Burton kind of got ran over by Chandler Smith. Now, I think Jeb might have gotten into Chandler Smith one time, but Chandler Smith then kind of paid back Jeb Burton a couple times, wrecked him once, and then later ended up wrecking him again and cost both the drivers really strong runs. So I think Jeb Burton had every right to be frustrated and upset with Chandler Smith for the incident, because he did get ran over. There's no question and no doubt about that. But then Jeb Burton basically was kind of talking crap on social media, and then eventually Chandler Smith, he kind of clapped back with a really funny and a really great video. Look, Chandler Smith has shown at times he can be a driver that gets really frustrated. I know those two have had a little bit of history, considering I believe that Jeb Burton got called out by Chandler Smith after the Talladega race, and then I believe Jeb Burton, when he won the Talladega race, he called out Chandler Smith as well. So they already have a little bit of history from this year as well, and I think it's a lot of pent-up frustration, because Chandler, he got ran over by Connor Mosack, which I was completely stupid by Connor Mosack, by the way, and completely uncalled for on his part. But when I look at the situation here, Jeb Burton basically talks a lot of crap about people. He was literally threatening to beat up Noah Gragson last year, never really backed up those words. So Jeb Burton, while he's shown not the greatest, and is one of the reasons why I don't think he's in a top-tier ride, I just think when you look at Chandler Smith, I think Smith could have been a little more patient as well. But at the same token, same time, it is what it is. I hope both drivers can move on from the situation. But it's interesting to see the fight and interesting to see the backlash and all that kind of stuff that both drivers kind of received on social media on both ends. In my honest opinion, it was very interesting to see for sure. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hailie Deegan and Nick Sanchez. Now, if you watched the Truck Series race at Gateway, you saw one of the more frustrating and controversial incidents of the day, and that was between Hailie Deegan and Nick Sanchez. So, after the race, basically around 10 or 15 laps to go, or about 40 laps to go, Nick Sanchez grew very, very impatient. And he had fresher tires than Hailie Deegan. So he pushes her into the corner and completely dumps her going into turn number 3, and she backs really hard in the outside wall, about 150 or 160 miles an hour, hits the outside wall really, really hard. And after the crash, she spoke to the media, and Hailie Deegan was very unhappy with Nick Sanchez and was really, really frustrated with how the last 2 weeks had gone. Nick Sanchez also kind of spoke to the media after the race, and he admits he made contact with Deegan. He kind of said it was unfortunate. I know Bob mentioned this week that he apologized, but in my honest opinion, he did not apologize for the incident and didn't really 100%, did take some responsibility, but didn't really apologize for the wreck as well. Look, I'm going to call Nick Sanchez out here. Look, I think Nick Sanchez, he's got a lot of talent. He showed Nick Xfinity and should have won that Texas race earlier this year. But what he did, in my honest opinion, was completely uncalled for and completely unnecessary. I know that he had fresher tires and could have easily, and maybe she should have gotten out of his way. But at the same token, same time, Nick Sanchez should know a lot better. He should be way more patient in that situation. He got way too impatient and went way too aggressive way too quickly. And I feel bad for Hailie Deegan. Yes, could she be performing a little bit better in the Truck Series? Absolutely. But how is she going to learn when she's getting wrecked, seems like, every single week? Last week at Charlotte, she had one of the best trucks in the field. Not one of the best, but she was a top 10 truck easily. And she got in the wreck that Zane Smith caused because Zane Smith got really loose off the corner. And she had nowhere to go in that situation. And there's been races where she should have finished better than she ended up finishing. Which is why I would like to see Hailie Deegan in the Xfinity Series next year. Why I got another video talk about that maybe later this week. But it's just really frustrating to see Hailie Deegan get screwed out like this because I think she's a better driver than people give her credit for. I know that she's struggled in trucks and she should perform better at ThorSport, but what can she do when she's getting wrecked and getting involved in wrecks that are not even her fault? This wasn't even her fault, in my opinion. It was really frustrating to watch, and I do feel bad for her because, in my opinion, she got completely screwed out of a really good run or maybe a top 10 run potentially, and she got robbed of that because Nick Sanchez decided to be way too patient and was a little bit over-aggressive, and that's why I think Deegan needs to move up to Xfinity, and I get her frustration. She got wrecked for no reason whatsoever by someone being way too impatient and way too aggressive, and Nick Sanchez should absolutely know better about that, in my honest opinion. He should know better and should have been a little more patient, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jamie McMurray. As it was announced in Stage 3 that Jamie McMurray will join the Fox Sports booth this upcoming weekend at Sonoma Raceway. Now, Jamie McMurray has called NASCAR Cup Series races in the past with Fox Sports. I believe he called the Coca-Cola 600 and also called Kansas as well. I am really excited about this for Jamie McMurray to get the opportunity to be back in the booth because Jamie McMurray is a really, really good commentator. He knows how to do a really good job broadcasting. I just watched the most recent race in Portland for Xfinity, and I think he did a really good job in the Xfinity broadcast at Portland. He's not someone that's overall crazy and overall top, but he's someone who can bring a lot of analytical analysis and does a very, very good job. I would love to see him maybe take over for Clint Boyer next year, maybe have Mike Joy, Kevin Harvick, maybe Jamie McMurray in the booth next year. I think that would be a very solid booth, and there would be a lot of energy in the booth as well, because Clint Boyer is a little over the top, and I think McMurray just does overall a really good job in the booth. So I am very excited about this. I think McMurray is going to do a really good job. He's been really good with Fox, in my opinion. I didn't know how he was going to be when he joined the Fox Sports team, but for him to be back in the booth, I think is going to be really fun. It's going to be really, really exciting, and I think he's going to do a really good job because Jamie McMurray is also, in my opinion, a very good road course racer, or was a really good road course racer. He didn't win a road course race, but always ran in front of road courses when they had the right setups, and it's someone I think will do a really good job explaining in the broadcast. So I'm excited to see he's back in the booth. I think he's going to do a really good job and an awesome job in the booth. I'm excited to see him back. I'm glad to see he's getting the opportunity to be in the Fox Sports booth once again, because I think he's going to do a really good job in the booth, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Austin Cindric versus Austin Dillon. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race at Gateway, you saw what happened between Austin Cindric and Austin Dillon. So on one of the late race restarts, we saw the crash between Austin Cindric and Austin Dillon. Austin got a really, really strong run, and he tried to pass Austin Dillon. Austin Dillon came up a little bit, but basically, Austin kind of right-reared Austin Dillon down the straightaway going into the corner, and unfortunately, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. ended up getting involved in the crash as well, and then just caused a red flag because the wall got damaged. Now, Austin Dillon, after the race and after the crash, he spoke to the media, and people from front stretch, Steven Stump was one of the people that he spoke to, and Austin Dillon was very, very unhappy and really, really upset after the race. And Richard Childress also spoke to the media, and he says that he felt like that Austin Dillon got wrecked because of payback. And Austin Dillon is also calling for suspension. He feels like he got treated the same way that Chase Elliott, when Chase Elliott right-reared Denny Hamlin down the straightaway, we saw that basically end up happening where he got suspended, and of course Bubba Wallace, when he got suspended for right-rearing Kyle Larson down the straightaway, he feels like Austin should be suspended. Well, let's talk about it for a second. I will say this, that I don't think that it was an intentional wreck. I know that they're saying it was payback, but obviously I think Rich Childress and Austin Dillon, they're wanting a suspension because they got right-reared. And he definitely did get right-reared for sure. But in my honest opinion, I don't think it's as egregious as what we saw between what happened with Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin and Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson. Could we see a suspension for Austin Dillon? Potentially, because it definitely was a right-rear situation. But like I said, I don't think it was as egregious what Austin Cindric did as what the other two did. Even though it was a right rear and it was very dangerous in the corner, it was a little bit of slower speed. So the hit was really hard. So like I said, there was a red flag for the crash ended up happening. So we'll have to see what NASCAR does decide to do. I get Austin Dillon being upset, though. He was having a decent day overall and was probably going to get a better finish. And I think he's a little more mad because he did end up getting wrecked. Meanwhile, his teammate, Kyle Busch, ended up winning the race. But overall, in my opinion, it's going to be very interesting to see what NASCAR does decide to do in regards to that. We'll have to watch the race time it goes on and see what NASCAR decides to do, because this decision will likely either come tomorrow or Wednesday if they're going to suspend him. I personally don't think you're going to see a suspension for Austin Cindric. I just don't think NASCAR is going to suspend him for it. We'll have to wait and see, though, what they decide to do, but I don't think there is going to be a suspension coming. But I get him being frustrated and upset with the situation, because in my honest opinion, he did get right-rear down the straightaway, even though it was not intentional. I don't think it was intentional. I know they're saying it was, but I don't think it was intentional, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about suspensions. Now, many drivers spoke to the media this week about a suspension regarding Chase Elliott, and they were all asked questions about what NASCAR should do in regards to suspensions. First, Ryan Blaney said NASCAR was consistent in the situation of Chase Elliott being suspended for one race. Similar to what happened with Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson, he felt that NASCAR was consistent. Next, Kevin Harvick says that NASCAR needs to look at data very similar to what happened in 2021 at Bristol, when he and Chase Elliott had their issues, and he said the suspension was appropriate for the situation. Bubba Wallace says putting foot down, NASCAR is putting foot down. They talk about the Chase Briscoe penalties, and he said that NASCAR was putting the foot down and being consistent in that situation as well. William Byron also kind of said the same thing. He thought NASCAR was being consistent there. And Kyle Busch also said that NASCAR is being consistent, thought it was the right call, but he also said he got suspended for basically one or two races for the whole weekend. And Kyle Busch says also that there should be no removal of playoff eligibility because of this. Let's talk about all of these opinions. First, I agree with all the drivers. NASCAR was extremely consistent, because a lot of fans were kind of saying, oh, Chase Elliott and the situation with Chase and Denny was not the same as what happened between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson. It was absolutely insane. Basically the same thing. You had basically a driver getting right-reared down the straightaway, especially in the dogleg, which is extremely dangerous in my honest opinion. And NASCAR was consistent in this situation, because if you're going to suspend Bubba Wallace for it, you got to suspend Chase Elliott for the same thing. I get why they had a hard time deciding if they're going to do it, though, because of the ratings and stuff. But you got to be extremely consistent in that situation. So NASCAR absolutely got that call right, and it was a well-justified call on NASCAR's part. I think it was absolutely the right call. I'll talk about Kyle Busch's comments on saying we shouldn't remove playoff eligibility. There's been a lot of talk about that, because remember, some people think very similar happened with, Johnny Sauter. He shouldn't have got basically a playoff waiver. We've seen at times where NASCAR has been a little bit inconsistent with their playoff waivers. We didn't see Grant Enfinger get a playoff waiver, a lot of that due to the fact that he run every single race. But we've seen a lot of drivers talk about, people in the media saying that NASCAR should remove the playoff waivers. And it's a very interesting decision. I don't disagree with Kyle Busch, by the way. I don't know if you should remove playoff waivers for basically right-rearing someone down the straightaway. I know why people think he shouldn't get a playoff waiver, and that's because of the fact that he did intentionally wreck somebody and could have removed someone from playoff contention and could have seriously hurt Denny Hamlin. Luckily, Denny Hamlin, even though he was violently shaking in the car, luckily Denny Hamlin was okay in that situation. But I do somewhat agree with Kyle Busch. I don't think you should remove playoff eligibility for the situation. But again, I think there needs to be a lot of talk about the waiver system overall in NASCAR. I think NASCAR has been at times inconsistent with how the waivers have worked. And I feel like there may need to be talk long term about the future of playoff waivers. But I do agree with Kyle Busch. And going back in the situation, I do appreciate NASCAR also being consistent here and making the right call here, because in my honest opinion, I think they made the justified and right call in the situation to suspend Chase Elliott. They were consistent. They made the right call. NASCAR's had a major issue over the years when it comes to their consistency. At least they set their foot down. I think every time a driver right rears, and it's going to make a driver think a lot more as well about if they're going to right rear someone down the straightaway. If you get mad at the driver, that's absolutely fine. You have a right to be frustrated. What Chase Elliott did, in my opinion, was completely uncalled for and completely unacceptable. NASCAR they set their foot down, and they made the right and justified call in that situation. So I'm glad to see a lot of drivers do agree that NASCAR did set their foot down and they made the right call, in my honest opinion, in that situation. So glad to see that and happy to see that NASCAR was consistent in the situation. I think the drivers absolutely agree with the decision. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Alex Bowman. Now, Alex Bowman is a story I didn't get to cover earlier this week, but Alex Bowman earlier in the week was on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and he was asked a question about his future in dirt racing. Well, Alex Bowman says that he is scaling back how much he is going to race in dirt. And the main reason he said that is to stay healthy. Now, Alex Bowman, of course, recently was involved in a very, very bad crash in a sprint car accident in Iowa, racing in Kyle Larson's high-limited racing series, if I'm not mistaken. And he had basically broke a vertebrae, had an L3 vertebrae infraction, or basically an injury that cost him a shot at racing for 5 or 6 weeks and was out for a very, very long time because of that. And a really, really bad situation there for Alex Bowman. Now, Alex Bowman, I think this is absolutely the right call on his behalf, because Alex Bowman has had 2 injuries over the last 5 or 6 months. Remember, Alex Bowman also suffered a concussion after the crash at Texas, albeit that was in the NASCAR Cup Series car, and that was not in a sprint car. But I think Alex Bowman is making the right call to take his health and safety a priority. I bet you Alex Bowman would love to go do sprint car racing. I think he's a sprint car owner, so he basically will be there at a lot of sprint car races, cheering on his drivers, CJ Leary, and the other guy that's on his team. But I think Alex Bowman understands the risk and understands if he goes out there and race, he could injure himself once again, because back injuries can come back time and time again, because when you get one, you get injured back a lot more easier, especially after an injury. So I get why Alex Bowman is scaling back and wanted to be a little more healthy and safe, but it's interesting he's scaling back, which means he likely won't be in the Chili Bowl in 2024 and likely won't be racing dirt, because he said eventually he's going to get back to racing dirt long term, probably during the offseason is my guess. He'll likely go back to dirt racing, but I think as of now, he wants to focus on being healthy, plus he wants to perform really, really good, because Bowman has to focus. Right now, he's just barely, I think he went back below the cutoff line because Hendrick kind of struggled this week at Gateway, and I think it's really smart play for him to back off how much he is racing dirt right now so he can focus on his health and being really safe. And I think it's a good call on his part and on his behalf to take his health and safety as the number one priority right there. So I get you that he wants to go dirt racing, but at the same token, same time, he's got to focus on his health, and I think he's making the right call to focus on his health and focusing toward that. So glad to see he's focusing on his health. Trust me, I think a lot of his fans would like to see Alex Bowman go do more dirt racing, because the more experience you get behind the wheel of a car, the better he's going to be. You look at Kyle Larson, how good of a driver he is on a week-by-week basis, and how Kyle Busch really formed really good at Gateway. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact of how well they were performing. So really interesting to see for sure. I bet you Bowman wanted to go dirt racing, but he does have to focus on his health, and I'm glad he decided to make a decision to focus on his health more than anything else. Glad to see he made a decision on focusing on his health. I get you, he wants to go dirt racing, but I think it's a good decision that he focus on his health. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott. Now, Denny Hamlin actually spoke to me this past weekend about him and Chase Elliott. And Denny Hamlin said he and Chase did communicate with each other this week, but he said he wanted Elliott to speak on what he told Hamlin. Now, Denny Hamlin also kind of reiterated to me, I think he also reiterated on the Fox broadcast for the green flag drop, that he kind of expected Chase Elliott to keep it private. Now, what's very interesting is on social media earlier this week, Chase Elliott basically kind of appreciated all support from the fans and really did not send out an apology. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about this for a second because for those of you who need a little bit of catch up, if you saw what happened at Charlotte, you saw the wreck between Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott. Denny Hamlin kind of forced Chase Elliott in the outside wall, then he just got a little tight and got loose, got washed up the track, and Chase Elliott got on the outside wall. Chase Elliott, with how frustrated he'd been, not having a great race, he would right rear Denny Hamlin down the straightaway in the dogleg at 180 miles an hour. Because of that, Chase Elliott would get a one-race suspension. Now, he'll be back this weekend at Sonoma, would not race at Worldwide Technology Racing because he right-reared him down the straightaway. Now, what's good to hear is both drivers did have communication. Both Denny and Chase are both, of course, part of the Coca-Cola Racing family, so they do work together in different areas. And I think Denny does have a lot of respect for Chase Elliott. But Denny Hamlin in that situation had every right to be frustrated at Chase for right-rearing down the straightaway. It doesn't matter what driver you are. If you right-rear someone down the straightaway, that's like taking the gloves off in hockey and you're threatening to hurt somebody and you want to basically get into a fight with that race car driver. So it's understandable Denny Hamlin was frustrated and upset about the situation. Denny Hamlin did also speak to media, and he said that the penalty was justified. Very similar to talk about a little bit earlier in this episode. Denny Hamlin had every right to be frustrated and was justified at being frustrated at Chase Elliott for that, but also justified to say that the penalty was absolutely the right call. I think Chase Elliott will learn and come back from his issues. Chase Elliott should absolutely know that what he did was unacceptable and unjust and completely uncalled for. I get Chase Elliott, like I said, being frustrated and upset at Denny Hamlin. He wasn't having a great race overall, but he could have expressed it after race talking to Denny Hamlin instead of right-rearing him down the straightaway. Didn't drivers learn from last year what happened when you right-rear someone down the straightaway? Look what happened with Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson. We saw what happened last year, and that's the reason why Chase got suspended. And I think, like I said, NASCAR was really consistent in that situation in making the right call and the justified call. I don't really think there's going to be any more really major issues between both Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin going forward. I think the issue has probably been resolved at this point, but at the same token, at the same time, how Chase Elliott can learn from this and come back and grow from this as a driver. Because probably, let's be honest, Chase Elliott probably at this point regrets. He's going to get speaking to media a lot this week about the situation. He'll probably go on the Pat McAfee show and talk about the situation, and we'll see what Chase Elliott has to say throughout the week. But in my honest opinion, Denny Hamlin, good to see they're both on communication terms. Seems like there's no more beef between both of them. Hopefully going forward, things do resolve between both drivers. No more issues come up because these two have had a little bit of a history. You go back to 2017, what happened between Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott, where Denny Hamlin just completely dumped Chase Elliott going into the corner and just ram in the back rear and dump him into the outside wall. And Chase was very unhappy with Denny Hamlin after that incident. But I hope they both can work together going forward and they can have a civil conversation and civil terms going forward and they can work together. Maybe Denny will share that on actions detrimental later this week. Who knows at this point? But nonetheless, sounds like they're both on speaking terms. Sounds like there's no more issues between both of them. And hopefully that can happen going forward where they can work together going forward, solve their differences, and can work together going forward in the foreseeable future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about FedEx. As it was reported by Adam Stern over the weekend that according to him, FedEx is close to striking a contract extension with Joe Gibbs Racing to continue sponsoring the team into the 2024 NASCAR season per people familiar. The precise scope of the agreement is unclear, but FedEx is expected to retain a sizable presence on the number 11 car. This is really, really huge for a couple of reasons. One, this likely means that Denny Hamlin is also going to sign a multi-year contract extension. One of the reasons that Denny Hamlin has not signed a contract extension yet with Joe Gibbs Racing is because of this FedEx situation. Honestly, I am a little surprised that FedEx is kind of returning, considering the fact of how much they've been scaling back, how much they have been sponsoring Denny Hamlin this year. Look how many races they've actually sponsored Denny Hamlin, and the number has been way down. Up to this point, I believe that this year, FedEx only sponsored Denny Hamlin in 4 or 5 races, and we've seen sports clips on the car and interstate batteries on the car more this year, and other companies that are not associated with FedEx. But it is very good to see that FedEx is going to be sticking around likely with Denny Hamlin, which is also big for Joe Gibbs Racing because that means another sponsor that's going to stay. We always talk about this last year of M&M's. M&M's announced in late 2021 that they were going to leave, and then we saw what happened to fall off from that. They tried to get a sponsor. We found out the company that was Orland, I believe, or Oracle was a company that was originally going to sponsor Kyle Busch, and then we saw what happened there, where it kind of all fell through, and then eventually Kyle Busch left Joe Gibbs Racing and went to Rich Schultz Racing. Has already had the most successful season of his career since probably the 2019 season, and Kyle Busch looking to be a championship threat and a contender. But it's also big for a lot of other reasons as well, because like I said, you've got a sponsor sticking around with Joe Gibbs Racing, but also, why is this a huge deal? Is it means that Denny Hamlin will stick around with Joe Gibbs Racing long term, and it likely means that Joe Gibbs Racing's lineup is going to be set for the next few years. Because I expect that Denny Hamlin's probably going to get a 2 or 3 year extension and to finish his career, because Denny Hamlin has said that if FedEx sticks around, he's going to finish his career at Joe Gibbs Racing. And let's be honest, Denny Hamlin is getting closer to the end of his career. By the end of this year, Denny Hamlin will be 43 years old, so I expect Denny Hamlin will sign a 2 or 3 year extension with Joe Gibbs Racing in the coming weeks. Maybe this week he signs an extension. We're not entirely sure. But nonetheless, this is a very, very big deal. Also, because like I said, Joe Gibbs Racing's lineup is likely set. And they're not going to have to go through the stage of basically going through the bunch of new younger drivers, because this is big for also for Christopher and Ty Gibbs, because that's another few years you're going to likely have Truex and Hamlin around, because Mark Truex Jr., he's likely going to be returning according to Bianchi earlier this week. We talked about this, but likely we're going to see Martin Truex Jr. also return in 2024. It sounds like that deal could be announced by the end of this month. It sounds like that is going to happen. Mark Truex Jr. is going to return. That's going to be big for Ty Gibbs to learn from Mark Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin, but also big for Christopher Bell as well, because Christopher Bell will not be now the oldest driver on the team. Christopher Bell by the end of next year will be 30 years old, so have a little more experience in the Cup Series, and will have to be able to rely on Denny Hamlin and Mark Truex Jr. long term as well. So this is very, very huge for Joe Gibbs Racing. It's good to see that this deal is likely going to get done, because we've always talked about the fact that Joe Gibbs Racing, it sounds like maybe now at this point we all think that maybe they weren't trying to keep Kyle Busch around. I know that a lot of people think, oh, well, basically the sponsor left, and yeah, Kyle Busch is getting a different deal. But I think for all those people that are Kyle Busch fans, I think we're kind of finding out a little bit of stuff going on there. But at the same token, same time, like I said, if you are a Denny Hamlin fan, this is really, really huge here, because this means that Denny Hamlin is going to stick around, because Denny Hamlin was not going to be screwed regardless. He was going to either be driving for Joe Gibbs Racing or 2311. He was still likely going to be in the Toyota camp, but it's also big for 2311 Racing, because there have been some talk that 2311 Racing is kind of part of the Denny Hamlin package. So maybe 2311 was maybe going to end up leaving Toyota if things didn't work out, but they're going to still stick with Toyota, which is really good to see, and that's good for Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, and even Kurt Busch as well long term. But nonetheless, major news right here. Great to see that FedEx is expected to return to Joe Gibbs Racing as a sponsor. We've talked about sponsor issues over the years for Joe Gibbs Racing. Glad to see that a sponsor is likely going to stick around, and very happy to see that FedEx is going to stick around heading into 2024, and looks like Joe Gibbs Racing future is set. And it's a big thing to talk about silly season as well, because silly season rumors are starting to pick up behind the scenes, and a lot of things are beginning to take shape. And we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to silly season going forward. But it sounds like Joe Gibbs Racing, they're set. We'll see what happens with the other teams. The 10 car could be open for other drivers going forward. It'll be very interesting to watch and see what happens going forward long term. But nonetheless, great to see that FedEx is expected to return in 2024. So, that is going over today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on so you know if I win a video that does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Links description below with that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about FedEx expected return in 2024? How big of a deal do you think this is for Joe Gibbs Racing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about the Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later tonight on the channel, I'm expected to have NASCAR Xfinity Series race picks from Sonoma. Tomorrow on the channel, I'm likely going to have a video revolving around Hailie Deegan if she should move up to the Xfinity Series or not in 2024. And then obviously, we got a lot of other content coming out this week. It is Sonoma Raceway week, of course. We got a lot of content dropping before we go on break next week. We'll have a one-week break coming up for the NASCAR break. And then obviously, of course, we've got a lot of racing coming up, and NBC takes over, which is going to be really great to see. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great and awesome NASCAR content. We're trying to reach 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel. So anyways, I'll see you guys for more awesome content going forward. Take care, everybody.